The moment you realize they never intended to give you credit changes everything. I stood in the back of the boardroom near the espresso machine, sipping from a paper cup that had gone cold 10 minutes ago. 6 months of my work, 12-hour days, skipped weekends, stress migraines, was now being presented like it had been dreamed up by Gordon and the suits. Gordon, my boss, wore his usual smug grin as he clicked through the slide deck. Every word out of his mouth made me want to snap the plastic lid off my cup and hurl it at the wall. And that's how our dynamic logistics platform can reduce port-to-warehouse lag by nearly 42%, Gordon said, waving the clicker like it was a baton and he was conducting some grand symphony. Full API integration, real-time rerouting, AI-based contingency modeling. My system, every word, every feature, every algorithm was mine. Not mine in the way people take credit for team projects. Mine like I had built the bones and skin and blood of it from scratch, mostly alone and always after hours. My name is Cal Redding. I'm 43. I live in Savannah, Georgia. I spent the last 12 years busting my ass at Ogden Dynamics as a senior systems engineer, building things people barely understood but everyone depended on. Today, I got erased. There were 10 people from Ogden in the room. Not one of them looked at me. Any questions? Gordon said, clapping his hands once, as if he'd just finished a TED Talk. The client team nodded politely. One woman, dark hair, slim charcoal suit, expression sharp as a scalpel, flipped through her folder with perfect calm. Her name tag read Sienna Cho, CEO, Carver Maritime Logistics. The other execs started clapping. It wasn't loud or enthusiastic, just that polite business-grade applause that says, "Thanks for not wasting our time." Sienna didn't clap. She kept reading. I backed further into the corner and tried not to let the humiliation show on my face. I'd dressed up today, cleaned my boots, even wore a button-up. For what? So I could watch Gordon parrot my white papers in front of a $6.3 million client like he was the genius behind it all? The thing is, I knew this would happen. I'd known it the second Gordon took an interest in my port optimization model 2 months ago. Knew it when he asked me for some bullets for a deck that I never saw again. Knew it when he told me the meeting room was full and maybe I could just sit in the back. I told myself it didn't matter, that if the client signed on, it'd mean job security. Maybe a bonus, maybe a quiet nod from Gordon on the way to the parking garage. But standing there, watching them all pretend I didn't exist, something shifted. I wasn't just mad, I was done. Gordon closed the laptop. Any final thoughts? Sienna finally looked up. Yes, she said. Her voice was calm, precise. I have a question about how the system handles port disruptions, particularly ones involving sudden embargoes or capacity failures. How does it predict and reroute under cascading failures at international ports? Gordon froze. So did everyone else. I knew the answer. Every line of code that made that prediction possible had been written on my laptop, often at 2 a.m., surrounded by coffee cups and empty takeout boxes. But Gordon just blinked. One of the sales guys coughed. A woman from strategy pulled out her phone, like she was suddenly very busy. Sienna's eyes scanned the room. Well, she asked. No one spoke, and that's when I knew I wasn't staying silent. Not this time. Actually, I said, louder than I meant to, I can answer that. Every head in the room turned. Sienna looked at me first. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't flinch, just pivoted her body slightly, giving me the floor like she already suspected where the real answer was coming from. Gordon's smile froze in place. That's Cal, he said quickly like he was swatting away a fly. He helped out on some back-end stuff. I stepped forward before he could say more. My palms were sweating, but my voice came out clear. Redundancy during cascading port failures is handled with predictive rerouting based on historical congestion data, real-time customs clearance forecasts, and intermodal fallback protocols. I turned towards Sienna. If the system detects a delay cluster, like, say, a COVID-style disruption at Busan, it'll auto-adjust ETAs and reroute through available nodes, accounting for regional embargoes, fuel contracts, and local haulage availability. The room went silent. No more polite smiles, no more shuffling papers. Sienna tilted her head. How does it detect delay clusters? Through satellite latency mapping and carrier signal degradation, our model monitors frequency shifts in outbound manifests. If it sees more than a 2.7% deviation over 6 hours, it flags the port. We built in escalation triggers tied to carrier-level deviations and customs downtimes. Gordon was blinking like a man who'd just been shoved underwater. "It's part of the overall system," he said, his voice rising. "A lot of people contributed. Cal just worked on—" Sienna held up a hand. "No offense, Mr. Granger, but I'd like Cal to walk us through the technical spec." I looked at her. She meant it. Right now, everyone else looked frozen in place. One of the sales guys glanced at Gordon like he was waiting for permission. Gordon stared at me like I'd grown a second head. I stepped forward. "Do you want the full logic tree or just the failover flow?" Sienna smiled, just slightly. "Give me the core." I pulled out my laptop. Yes, I had it ready, even though I wasn't on the official agenda. Opened up the flowchart. "Here," I said, pointing. "This is the logic gate we wrote for international nodes. If a port fails the bandwidth threshold, the system runs a dynamic routing algorithm that looks at cost, travel time, customs friction, and environmental impact. Each route gets a weighted score. We built in a learning loop so it gets smarter the more disruptions it sees." I walked them through the live dashboard, showed how it simulated options in real time. No one said a word. Even the senior VP from Carver stopped scrolling on his phone. Sienna leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and said, "And how does this integrate with our current TMS?" "It doesn't just integrate," I said. "It predicts failures before your TMS even flags them. Then it passes clean, standardized data downstream. So, your teams can make faster adjustments without manual override." Sienna nodded once. "That's what I thought. This isn't back-end. This is the system." I glanced at Gordon. His mouth opened like he was about to argue, but no sound came out. Sienna looked at me. "Not Gordon. Not anyone else." "Can you send us the spec sheet by end of day?" she asked. "I want it from you." Gordon cleared his throat. "We'll review and send over—" "No," Sienna said. "I want Cal to send it." I stood straighter. "I'll have it over before 4. She closed her folder. Good. And that was it. The meeting ended not with a pitch, but with a shift. Nobody clapped this time, because now everyone knew who built the damn system. And I wasn't going to let them forget it. I got the email around 10:17 the next morning. Subject line, "Contract review, spec sheet sign-off." The body was 1 sentence long. "Can you confirm who on our end will be signing the technical documentation for Carver Maritime?" Sienna had CC'd Gordon. I stared at it for a solid minute, then typed, "That would probably be Gordon." Her reply came less than a minute later. "It shouldn't be. We'd prefer the person who actually built the system. No smiley face, no softening language, just clean, sharp clarity." I didn't respond. Instead, I printed the email and walked it straight to Gordon's office. He didn't even look up when I knocked. "Door's open," he said, pretending to scroll through something important. I stepped in and laid the printout on his desk. "Got a request from Carver. They want me signing the tech docs." That got his attention. His fingers froze mid-click. Why the hell would they ask for that? I didn't say anything, just stood there. He picked up the paper, read it twice, then tossed it down like it was garbage. "No, that's not happening." I waited. "We don't just let engineers sign off on external deliverables," he said, waving a hand like this was common knowledge. "There's a chain of command. You know that." She asked for me specifically. Gordon leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling like it had the answers. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "You completely hijacked that meeting. Do you have any idea how that made the rest of the team look?" I tilted my head. "You mean how I made us look like we knew what we were talking about?" That pushed him over. He slammed his hands on the desk. "You embarrassed us. You made it about you. That was a team effort and you took it personal." "No," I said. "You made it personal. When you stood in that room and said I helped on the back end like I was some intern fetching JSON logs." His face turned red. "Watch it." "No," I said again. "You watch it, because I'm the one signing those specs. But I'll only do it under 3 conditions." He stared at me, stunned. "You're joking?" "I'm not." He stood up slowly, like he wanted to loom over me. Didn't work. I didn't move an inch. You seriously think you can walk in here and make demands? Yep. What do you want? I laid it out, calm and steady. Recognition as lead architect in the spec documentation and client comms. I run the implementation phase, full oversight, final say on all core changes, and I want a 20% raise. He blinked like he misheard me, then he laughed. You're insane. That's not a negotiation. That's extortion. No, I said. It's leverage. You tried to pass me off like an extra. Carver's not buying it, and neither am I. He paced the room like a man walking through smoke. I should fire your ass on the spot. You could, I said, but I don't think you will. Because if you do, I'm guessing Sienna Cho gets real curious about why the guy who built her system just disappeared. He stopped pacing. I let the silence hang. You think you've got her ear now, he said finally, voice low and bitter. I didn't answer, because we both knew I did. He sank back into his chair, looking like someone had just kicked out one of the legs. Clock's ticking, I said. Specs go out by 5 aussi. He didn't respond, just stared at his monitor like it might rescue him. I turned and walked out, heart pounding but steady. I wasn't bluffing. Not this time. I got the calendar invite just after lunch. HR, 2:30 p.m., conference room. B, no subject line, no context, just a time and a room. I already knew what it was. When I walked in, Gordon was already there, arms folded, doing that smug half smile like he'd already won. Across from him sat Vanessa from HR, tapping on her tablet. She barely looked up when I sat down. Cal, she said, thanks for coming. We reviewed your recent concerns and wanted to discuss some adjustments to your role and compensation. Adjustments. What a word. Gordon leaned forward like this was a friendly catch-up over coffee. Look, I'll be the first to admit, things got heated, but the last thing we want is friction with a senior engineer like you. So, let's talk about a path forward. I didn't say anything, just waited. Vanessa took over. We're prepared to acknowledge your contributions to the Carver platform. You'd be listed as a key developer on the implementation team. We're also offering a 5% performance bonus this cycle. I raised my eyebrows. A bonus? It's a recognition of your role, she said, as if 5% made up for 6 months of silence and stolen credit. And the implementation lead? That will still report through Gordon, she said carefully. We believe maintaining a clear management hierarchy is best for project continuity. I looked at Gordon. His smile was tighter now. Partial credit, I said. And a pat on the head. Don't be dramatic, he snapped. No, I said. Let's call it what it is. You're offering me a bronze sticker and hoping I smile for the picture. Gordon stood up. We're offering you a way to be part of something bigger than yourself. That system exists because of the team. I let out a short breath. That system exists because I built it. Vanessa's voice stayed even. Cal, let's be reasonable. You're a valued contributor. We're offering a meaningful bonus and a prominent role. I cut her off. You've got until 5. They both blinked. What? Gordon said. You heard me. 5 o'clock. I get what I asked for. Lead architect title, control over implementation, 20% raise. Or I walk, and I'll make sure Sienna knows why. That sounds like a threat, Vanessa said flatly. It's not, I said. It's a reminder. I'm not bluffing, and I'm not asking again. Gordon was red in the face. You think Sienna gives a damn about you once the deal's signed? I think she gives a damn about systems that don't fail. The room went quiet. I stood, straightened my jacket, and turned to the door. My hand was on the handle when Gordon said, You walk out, we assume you're resigning. I paused, then turned just enough to look at him over my shoulder. Assume whatever helps you sleep. I walked out. Didn't look back. In the hallway, I felt my chest tighten. Not anger, fear, the kind that shoots down your arms and clutches your gut. I ducked into the first floor restroom and locked the stall. My legs were shaking. I stayed there for almost 10 minutes, just breathing. But underneath the fear was something else, something steady. I wasn't afraid of them anymore, and that was new. At 4:47 p.m., I saw her coming. Vanessa from HR walking the floor like she didn't want anyone watching her. No tablet this time, just a manila envelope in her hands. She stopped at my desk. Didn't bother with the fake smile. "Can we talk here?" I nodded. Didn't even pause what I was doing, just minimized my code window and turned slightly in my chair. She handed me the envelope. "Here's the revised offer." I opened it, pulled out the single page, and skimmed it. Full title, Lead Systems Architect. Implementation Phase Lead, with independent authority on structure and execution. 17% salary increase. Not 20, but close. I looked up. "Gordon sign off on this?" "He approved it," she said. "But he didn't want to be the one handing it to you." "Shocking." She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "I'm supposed to remind you to keep things professional. No gloating, no emails, no announcements." I folded the page back into the envelope. "I've always been professional." She gave a short nod. "That's what I told them." She left before I could say anything else. I didn't sign it right away. I sat there, staring at the closed envelope like it might burst into flames. My inbox pinged, another update from Sienna, already looping me directly into her ops lead at Carver. They weren't waiting around. I slid open my desk drawer, grabbed my pen, and signed the offer. No hesitation this time, no panic, just ink on paper. For the first time in years, I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief exactly, more like gravity, like the floor had finally stopped moving beneath me. Later that night, I stayed late, not to prove anything, not out of guilt. I just wanted to finish what I'd started. I rewrote 3 modules from scratch, ran a simulation with the new redundancies, pushed the clean build to the shared repo, and made a note to loop in the junior devs the next morning. When I finally shut down and grabbed my coat, the office was almost empty. The only light still on was the one over Gordon's office. His blinds were drawn. I didn't knock, I didn't need to. He'd lost. He knew it. But it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like math, like something had finally balanced. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the brushed steel doors. I didn't look smug. I didn't look angry, I just looked like a man who'd been through a war and walked out with something to show for it. Was it everything I asked for? Not quite. Was it enough? Yeah, for now. Because this wasn't over, I could feel it in the silence. The real fight. The one that doesn't happen in boardrooms or HR meetings was still coming, and I was finally ready for it. The silence started the next morning. No good work on the release. No nod of acknowledgement in the hallway. Not even a passive-aggressive smile. Just nothing. Gordon stopped talking to me, not in a loud, dramatic way. He simply stopped. I'd sit 2 seats away during leadership check-ins, and he'd route every comment through someone else. He'd email the entire team about code reviews, except me. Deadlines doubled, priorities shifted overnight, tickets got rerouted back to me with vague, impossible asks like, "Optimize this more," or "Make it cleaner," whatever that meant. And when I'd reply asking for clarification, silence. He didn't need to yell. I was being frozen out, one passive-aggressive move at a time. But I didn't crack. Instead, I built a team. They gave me implementation lead, so I led. I pulled in 2 junior devs from the pool, Raj and Devin, both in their 20s, both smart, hungry, and a little rough around the edges. Reminded me of me back when I thought hard work was enough. We sat down the first afternoon in a tiny conference room nobody ever used and mapped out a new deployment plan, one that actually worked. No corporate filler, just code, logic, and hard deadlines. Raj asked me, "You sure Gordon's cool with this structure?" "No," I said, but he signed off on it. "So, we're doing it." Devin laughed. "This is going to be interesting." They were good. Fast learners, didn't waste time, and asked the right questions. I started looking forward to our stand-ups more than anything else. Meanwhile, the stuff from Gordon's side kept getting weirder. At one point, he started sending me midnight emails. Long, meandering, typo-riddled messages, CCing half the department, all worded just vaguely enough to cover himself while making sure the pile landed on my desk. Like clockwork, every Sunday night. I'd wake up Monday to an inbox full of his loose ends, dressed up as urgent blockers. I stopped responding to the bait. Instead, I forwarded them to Sienna during our weekly check-ins. Those meetings were the only part of my job that felt sane. She'd hop on the call, hair pulled back, coffee mug in hand, and cut straight to the chase. "How's it really going?" she asked one morning. I shrugged. "We're hitting targets. Internally, still political." She leaned back in her chair. "Well, from our side, you're the only one giving straight answers. That matters." The following week, we shipped a key update 2 days ahead of schedule. Sienna emailed me directly. "Nice work. If you're free sometime soon, I'd like to grab coffee and talk a big picture." I read that line 3 times. Big picture. That wasn't a project check-in. That was something else. I showed up the next day in a clean button-down, even trimmed my beard, which I never did midweek. Gordon didn't look at me when I walked in. I sat through another hour of him pretending I didn't exist while I quietly checked deployment logs and reviewed feedback from Sienna's team. When the meeting ended, I packed up without saying a word. In the elevator, Raj turned to me. "You okay?" I looked over at him. He wasn't just asking about the project. "Yeah," I said, "I'm good." Because even if Gordon was pretending I didn't exist, my team knew who I was. And the client, she was about to make things very real. I sat across from Sienna at a small cafe near the edge of town, the sound of clinking coffee cups and low chatter surrounding us. She was direct, as always. No small talk, no pleasantries. "You're being wasted at Ogden," she said, folding her hands in front of her, like we were already getting to the heart of the matter. "I don't want to waste you. I want you to run a new innovation unit at Meridian." I felt my heart rate pick up, but I didn't show it. "Go on." She wasn't one for fluff. She laid out the details. Double your pay, full leadership authority, equity in a growing company that's going places, and, this is important, freedom to shape your own team, your own projects, your own direction. I sat back in my chair, absorbing the offer. It felt like everything I'd worked for coming to fruition, and I'd have full control over the implementation. I asked, already imagining the possibilities, the freedom. "Yes," she said, with that slight smile of hers that could melt steel if you weren't paying attention. "You'll run the show. Whatever you need to make it happen, you'll have it. We'll put resources behind you. No red tape." I leaned forward. "And what's the catch? I'm not exactly a free agent, you know? I've got a whole team here, a whole project that's still in the air. What about the Ogden contract?" Sienna's eyes locked with mine. "We're talking about a future, Cal, not a contract. I'm offering you the chance to build something real, something that reflects your ability, not just play a small part in someone else's game. You've already proven you're more than capable. I'm just asking if you want more." She didn't need to sell it any further. The offer was clear, and it was exactly what I had been craving. Control, respect, the opportunity to actually shape something from the ground up, without having to fight for credit at every turn. "All right," I said after a beat. "I'll finish the implementation here, but yes, I'm interested." Her smile deepened. "Good. We'll be in touch to finalize the details. But I wanted to make sure you understood. We're not just offering you a job, we're offering you a mission." A mission. I like the sound of that. I paid for the coffee and we exchanged a few more words about logistics, but honestly, my mind was already racing through the possibilities. Meridian wasn't just another company. They were a new frontier, one that could give me everything Ogden had failed to. As I walked back to the office, my head was clear. For the first time in years, I felt like I had options. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't stuck. Ogden had never treated me like anything more than a cog, but here, with Meridian, I was more than just a player. I was the one calling the shots. And that walk back to the office, it was the first step towards something that wasn't just surviving anymore. It was about winning. The system went live 2 weeks ahead of schedule. It wasn't flawless, nothing ever is, but it worked better than anyone expected. Real-time rerouting, adaptive scheduling, the kind of stuff people usually spent years on. We'd managed to get it in place in less than 6 months. Sienna and the Carver team were ecstatic. Their CEO, Tom Harvey, shook my hand harder than I expected, looking at me like I was some kind of hero. Not that I cared about the recognition, not anymore, but seeing the satisfaction in Sienna's eyes, that meant something. At the launch event, I didn't bother with the typical thank you speech that most people would have. I didn't want applause. It wasn't about that. What mattered was that the system worked, and I got to see it running in the real world. It wasn't just a code I wrote. It was a living thing, helping people. Gordon was there, of course, standing at the back of the room, hands shoved in his pockets, a weak smile pasted on his face. He had to pretend he didn't care about the credit, but his tight jawline gave him away. I knew he was angry, and it was sweet. I could see him trying to slip into the shadows, probably hoping no one would ask about the tech. But Sienna was too sharp for that. She made sure everyone knew who had built it. Every time someone asked her how the system was performing, she'd turn to me with that glint in her eye, nodding toward me like I was the one who'd made all of this possible. It felt good, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. The event wrapped up around 7, and I stayed late to clean up a few lingering issues on the server. When I walked out of the building, I felt the weight of the day settling in. But it was a good kind of weight, the kind that said, "You've earned this." That night, I went home and found a bottle of whiskey I'd been saving for a moment like this. The idea of drinking it alone didn't bother me. There was peace in knowing I had a choice now. I woke up the next morning and checked my email. There it was, sitting in my inbox. 2 weeks' notice, Ogden Dynamics. I'd typed it the night before, but something about seeing it in black and white made it real. I wasn't leaving in a blaze of glory. No speeches, no cake, no crowds applauding. This wasn't a farewell. It was a closing chapter. I packed my things quietly. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. Not to Gordon. Not to the people who'd pretended to care about my work for so long. I left Ogden with my head high. They hadn't given me credit when I deserved it, but I was taking something far more valuable. My freedom. And as I stepped out of the building, the sun shining just right, I realized something. It wasn't just about getting the recognition, it was about not needing it anymore. Sometimes the best exits are the ones no one notices, the ones where you walk away and the door closes quietly behind you. I was free, and I was going to make sure no one could take that from me again. Meridian gave me the reins I had been craving, and I wasted no time taking advantage. When I walked into the office on day 1, it felt like stepping into a place where everything mattered. They handed me a blank canvas, and I was going to paint my masterpiece. The team mine to build. The resources, anything I needed. I started with the core of my former team at Ogden, Raj and Devon. They were both eager for something more meaningful, and I trusted them. I'd spent the last few months watching them prove they could handle the heavy lifting, and now I was ready to show them how to lead too. I posted a message on a few developer forums I trusted, reached out to contacts from old projects, and it wasn't long before messages started flooding in. Are you hiring? Is there room on your team? It felt surreal. It was the first time I wasn't chasing down the right people. They were coming to me. Of course, I couldn't take everyone, but I brought in 4 talented devs who had caught my eye. They weren't all perfect fits, but they were the kind of people who worked with passion, not just paychecks. That's the thing about building something real. It attracts people who want to make something that matters, not just punch a clock. I had conversations with people who had left Ogden, some who had been burned by Gordon's team, and I knew what it felt like to have your efforts go unrecognized. But here, at Meridian, that was different. I wasn't just leading a team, I was building a culture of respect, of hard work, and of real, tangible progress. Sienna had been right when she said I was wasting away at Ogden. But this was the kind of work that made me feel like I was finally in the right place. We worked hard, long hours sometimes, but there was always a sense that we were moving towards something greater. Weeks passed. The first client project we tackled together was a resounding success. I made sure everyone got their due credit. No one worked in the shadows. I wasn't about to make the same mistake Ogden had. Recognition mattered, and for the first time in years, I had the freedom to give it without worrying about someone stealing the spotlight. And then the ripple effects started to show. Ogden lost a major client to our system. A competitor had used my old design framework to drive a new pitch. They didn't get the details right, but the skeleton, that was mine. I smiled when I heard, not because I enjoyed seeing Ogden struggle, but because it was proof. It was validation that what I had built wasn't just a fluke. The system was functional, and it was better than they had ever realized. Sienna called me into her office one afternoon, not long after we closed our second deal. She was beaming. "You've built something remarkable here, Cal. You've created a place that people want to be a part of. You've made it a home for talent." I nodded. "And that's just the beginning. We're building something bigger than just software." The message was clear. The company was growing, and so was I. With each hire, with every project completed on time, with every client that switched to our system, I realized something more. It wasn't just about building software anymore. It was about building a community of real talent, a place where people weren't just working. They were thriving. I watched as Ogden, once a giant to me, slowly faded in the rear view, not just as a company I used to work for, but as a symbol of everything I didn't want to be. And that was freedom. 2 years later, I found myself standing in front of a packed room at the Supply Chain Innovation Summit. The air was thick with the usual buzz of conference chatter, a mix of hope and exhaustion. The audience was made up of executives, engineers, and consultants, all looking for answers for the next big thing. I'd been invited as one of the keynote speakers, a surprise to anyone who'd known me at Ogden. I stood at the podium, presenting my thoughts on supply chain optimization, how tech could shape the future, how it could help companies thrive when the world seemed to be falling apart. The words came easy. I'd spent years buried in code, but speaking about what mattered, that was the stuff I lived for now. It wasn't just systems and algorithms. It was about people, the way technology could give them control, freedom, power. As I scanned the crowd, I caught a familiar face in the back row. It was Gordon. His hair was grayer than when I'd last seen him, the lines around his eyes deeper. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't belong here. He shifted in his seat, probably not used to being the one sitting in the back, in the cheap seats, instead of running the show. I didn't miss a beat. As my talk wrapped up, I gave the room a nod, then let my eyes drift back to him. For just a second, I let myself enjoy the view. I acknowledged him with a small nod, nothing more, not a handshake, not a word. He didn't return the gesture. Instead, his gaze dropped to his lap, and I could see the tightness in his jaw. He hadn't changed. Not really. He was still the same man who tried to erase me, who thought his authority would always be enough. After my presentation, a young guy approached me. He looked nervous but determined. His suit wasn't as sharp as Gordon's had been, but there was something familiar about the way he held himself, like he was looking for a way out. "You're Cal Redding, right?" he asked, almost hesitantly. I nodded. I heard you used to work at Ogden," he said, glancing back at the back row, where Gordon was still lingering. "They're stealing my work." I felt a jolt of recognition in my chest. It wasn't the first time someone had approached me with this kind of story. It was a reminder of how deep the rot ran at places like Ogden, how they used and discarded people, like parts in a broken machine. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the fear in his eyes evident. I handed him my card, a small, almost inconsequential gesture, but it meant everything in that moment. "You start by knowing you're not crazy," I said. "Then you stop letting them get away with it." His eyes widened as he read the card. I don't know if I can." "You can," I said, cutting him off. "You just need to start. Trust me, they'll fold the second they realize you're not going anywhere." He nodded, his shoulders straightening. Maybe it wasn't the answer he'd expected. Maybe it wasn't a grand plan, but it was something. It was the kind of knowledge I had wished someone had given me when I was where he was, fighting for recognition, fighting for my work. The young man walked away, looking like a small weight had been lifted from his shoulders. I turned back to the podium, my eyes catching Gordon's once more. This time, he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the floor, avoiding the truth in the room, the truth that I had built something real, something lasting, something that wasn't going away. A few minutes later, I was on my way out of the summit when I got a text from my old HR contact at Ogden. "Helios wants to talk to you. They're looking for a VP. 5 years too late, right?" I smiled at the irony. Helios had been on my radar for a while now, but they hadn't known what they had until I walked away from Ogden. And now they were coming to me, asking for a seat at the table. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a sign that the world had shifted, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't just being recruited. I was the one with the power to choose. But as I sat in the car on the way back to the office, a thought struck me. The real victory the one I hadn't seen before, wasn't about outsmarting Gordon or proving him wrong. It wasn't about being wanted by Helios. It was about making sure people like Gordon couldn't thrive anymore. And that was the legacy I was building now. The world had changed, and I wasn't just part of it. I was shaping it, and that was all I ever needed.